These accessories are banned in the NFL. And to start, we have to talk about helmets, because in 2019, Antonio Brown was so pissed over the league's helmet rules that he held out of training camp, and the league forced Brown to choose a new helmet after banning his old one once he was traded to the Raiders. However, Brown was used to wearing his own helmet, which he'd worn for 10 years. So Brown was willing to do whatever it took to keep his old helmet, even if that meant filing a grievance against the league. And unsurprisingly, the league won the grievance, forcing Brown to pick a new helmet. On top of this, the Raiders fined him for missing practice time. Let's talk about dark visors. The real reason players wore dark visors isn't what you may think. Just ask Randall McDaniel, who became the first player to wear a dark visor. After all, the Hall of Famer explains, "I got poked in the eye the Friday before I was going to start my first game, and I didn't want anyone to see the big patch over my left eye. So the equipment guy, Dennis Ryan, walked in with this dark shield attached to my helmet and said, 'No one will know you have a patch on your eye.' As a result, the league let him keep the dark visor. It wasn't until 1998 when the NFL banned dark visors for players without a medical exemption. Yet, this didn't stop Odell Beckham Jr. In a 2019 Monday Night Football matchup against the Jets, OBJ wore a dark visor during the first half, but the refs weren't having it, since they forced OBJ to leave the game so he could replace his visor with a clear one. Meanwhile, the others weren't so lucky. That's because when Brandon Marshall played for the Bears, he struggled with borderline personality disorder. So Marshall decided to wear a green pair of cleats one game in order to promote BPD awareness. Yet, the NFL wasn't so sympathetic, since they forced players to wear cleats with a designated team color. So the NFL handed Marshall a whopping $10,500 fine. Yikes! But Marshall isn't the only one to be fined for his choice of cleats, since my man DeAndre Hopkins wore Yeezy 350 cleats from Adidas that season. Unfortunately, the NFL didn't tolerate Hopkins' footwear decision and fined him $6,000 for wearing banned cleats. While this fine is nothing for millionaires like Hopkins, it still did the trick. Hopkins says that he won't ever wear Yeezys again, unless Kanye West, the man behind the cleats, pays the fine for him. Considering he hasn't worn the cleats since then, it's safe to say that Kanye isn't willing to pay up. On the other hand, Sean Taylor and Clinton Portis weren't afraid of getting fined in the early 2000s. You see, it all started in 2004 when they wore red-colored socks instead of white, which resulted in a $5,000 fine for both players. Then, Portis wore the same socks to the very next game, which led to a $10,000 fine. Portis wasn't taking no for an answer, but neither was Sean Taylor, since a year later, Taylor and Portis broke the league's uniform policy again. Portis wore black shoes, striped socks, and an unapproved eye shield. And you better believe that the league was pissed. So they fined Portis $20,000 this time around. Meanwhile, Taylor also wore a pair of striped socks, earning him a $5,000 fine. This brings us to Wes Welker, who wore a banned hat for 16 consecutive weeks. However, 15 out of those 16 weeks, Welker had no idea he was breaking the league's protocol, because it wasn't until receiving a $10,000 fine in the 16th week that Welker learned it was illegal. On this note, let's transition to Cam Newton, who is also in a similar situation. As a proud sponsor of Under Armour, Newton figured the least he could do was wear Under Armour visor clips on his helmet. Yet once again, this was breaking the league's protocol, and the league initially let it slide. See, up until handing Newton a $10,000 fine, and that's because Newton wasn't subscribed to REDZONE. So subscribe right now! I know you're not trying to get fined $10K by the NFL. However, Eventually, the league decided that enough was enough. Since all NFL uniforms are sponsored by Nike, the league thought that wearing competing visor clips was crossing the line. Now let's talk about Ben Roethlisberger getting fined in 2019 for wearing something illegal. Because after suffering a season-ending elbow injury in Week 2, many people assumed Big Ben was in the clear as far as fines go. But they were wrong. Because when the NFL spotted Big Ben wearing an Apple Watch on the sidelines, they immediately assumed the worst by giving him a $5,000 fine. Jeez, the NFL is unforgiving. On the other hand, I'm not so sure I agree with the NFL's decision to fine D'Angelo Williams, since back in 2015, Williams just wanted to honor his mother and 4 aunts, whom he lost to cancer. And he figured, what better way than wearing eye black with the phrase, "Find the cure." While this decision was a great way to promote cancer research, the league thought otherwise by fining Williams $6,000. That's unfortunate, but come on, can't the league just let this one instance slide? After all, they once revoked a $7,000 fine for Demario Davis for similar reasons. The year was 2019, and Davis was wearing a headband with the phrase "Man of God" on it, which obviously led to the $7,000 fine. However, not for 1 second does Davis regret his actions. You see, a lot of good also came from this decision. After Davis wore this headband, he ended up earning over $120,000 by selling the headband to others, all of which he donated to St. Dominic's. Then, on top of this, the NFL saw what Davis was doing and eventually revoked the fine. What a heartwarming story. But before your hearts get too fuzzy, you gotta hear what band accessory Jerry Rice used throughout his career. Because it always seemed like Rice had a leg up on the rest of the receivers in the league. Between his smooth route running, unfathomable athleticism, and great hands, Rice was unstoppable. Turns out, Rice used a banned sticky substance on his gloves called Stickum in order to ensure that he never dropped a pass. And thankfully, the league never found out. Otherwise, who knows the fine or punishment they would have handed out. In fact, the only reason we know Rice cheated is because of the Hall of Famer himself. Since Rice has recently admitted,
"This might be a little illegal, guys. I just put a little spray, a little stickum on them, just to make sure that texture is a little sticky."
Say what you want, but Rice has no regrets. Plus, he is still widely considered the greatest receiver of all time. Anyways, this brings us to another Hall of Famer, Brian Urlacher, who was once fined an absurd $100,000 for wearing a vitamin water hat. But as excessive as this fine seems, it's less crazy considering Urlacher wore this at Media Day right before Super Bowl 41. And also, the dude should have known better than to publicly support a company that wasn't partnered with the NFL. And before you go, you have to click this video to see the 10 most emotional NFL moments. Trust me, you don't want to miss it.